I think we have to do something about a culture, a piece of the culture of medicine that has to change. And I think it starts with one physician, and that's me. And maybe I've been around long enough that I can afford to give away some of my false prestige to be able to do that. Before I actually begin the meat of my talk, let's begin with a bit of baseball. I'm going to focus on one stat that I hope a lot of you have heard of. It's called a batting average. So we talk about a 300, a batter who bats 300. That means that ball player batted safely, hit safely 3 times out of 10 at-bats. That means, hit the ball into the outfield, it drops, it didn't get caught, and whoever tried to throw to first base didn't get there in time, and the runner was safe. 3 times out of 10. Do you know what they call a 300 hitter in Major League Baseball? Good. Really good. Maybe an all-star. Do you know what they call a 400 baseball hitter? That's somebody who hit, by the way, 4 times safely out of every 10. Legendary. Now let's take this back into my world of medicine where I'm a lot more comfortable, or perhaps a bit less comfortable, after what I'm going to talk to you about. What do you think a batting average for a cardiac surgeon or a nurse practitioner or an orthopedic surgeon, an OBGYN, a paramedic is supposed to be? 1,000. Very good. Okay? Now, the truth of the matter is nobody knows in all of medicine what a good surgeon or physician or paramedic is supposed to bat. What we do, though, is we send each one of them, including myself, out into the world with the admonition, be perfect, never, ever, ever make a mistake, but you worry about the details. I came out of medical school with the impression that if I memorized everything and knew everything, or as much as possible, as close to everything as possible, that it would immunize me against making mistakes. And it worked for a while. Until I met Mrs. Drucker. I was a resident at a teaching hospital here in Toronto when Mrs. Drucker was brought to the emergency department at the hospital where I was working. At the time, I was assigned to the cardiology service on a cardiology rotation, and it was my job when the emergency staff called for a cardiology consult to see that patient in emerge and to report back to my attending. And I saw Mrs. Drucker, and she was breathless, and when I listened to her, she was making a wheezy sound, and when I listened to her chest with a stethoscope, I could hear crackly sounds on both sides that told me that she was in congestive heart failure. That wasn't a difficult diagnosis to make. I made it, and I set to work treating her. I gave her aspirin, I gave her medications to relieve the strain on her heart, I gave her medications that we call diuretics, water pills, to get her to pee out the excess fluid. And over the course of the next hour and a half or 2, she started to feel better. And I felt really good. And that's when I made my first mistake. I sent her home. And at the end of the day, I packed up to leave the hospital and walked to the parking lot to take my car and drive home, when I did something that I don't usually do. I walked through the emergency department on my way home. And it was there that another nurse, not the nurse who was looking after Mrs. Drucker before, but another nurse said 3 words to me that are the 3 words that most emergency physicians I know dread. Others in medicine dread them as well, but there's something particular about emergency medicine because we see patients so fleetingly. The 3 words are, do you remember? Do you remember that patient you sent home? The other nurse asked matter-of-factly. Well, she's back, in just that tone of voice. Well, she was back all right. She was back in near death. About an hour after she had arrived home, after I'd sent her home, she collapsed. And her family called 911, and the paramedics brought her back to the emergency department, where she had a blood pressure of 50, which is in severe shock. And she was barely breathing, and she was blue. And the emerge staff pulled out all the stops. They gave her medications to raise her blood pressure. They put her on a ventilator. And, I was shocked and shaken to the core. And I went through this roller coaster because after they stabilized her, she went to the intensive care unit, and I hoped against hope that she would recover. And over the next 2 or 3 days, it was clear that she was never going to wake up. She had irreversible brain damage. They say you never forget the names of those who die, and that was my first time to be acquainted with that. Over the next few weeks, I beat myself up And I experienced for the first time the unhealthy shame that exists in our culture of medicine. Unhealthy shame I'm talking about is the one that makes you so sick inside. It is the one that says, not that what you did was bad, but that you were bad. I kept asking myself these questions. Why didn't I ask my attending? Why did I send her home? And then at my worst moments, why did I make such a stupid mistake? And why did I go into medicine? Slowly but surely, it lifted. I began to feel a bit better. And you know, on a cloudy day, there was a crack in the clouds and the sun started to come out, and I wondered, you know, maybe I could feel better again. And I made myself a bargain, you know, that if only I redoubled my efforts to be perfect and never make another mistake again, please make the voices stop. And they did. And I went back to work. And then it happened again. Twice in one emergency shift, I missed appendicitis. Now that takes some doing. Especially when you work in a hospital that at the time saw about 14 people at night. Now, in both cases, you know, I didn't send them home, and I don't think there was any gap in their care. But each time, they were gnawing at me, eating at me. And I'd like to be able to say to you that my worst mistakes only happened in the first 5 years of practice, as many of my colleagues say, which is total BS. Some of my doozies have been in the last 5 years. Alone, ashamed, and unsupported. Here's the problem. If I can't come clean and talk about my mistakes, if I can't find the still small voice that tells me what really happened, how can I share it with my colleagues? How can I teach them about what I did so that they don't do the same thing? If I were to walk into a room filled with my colleagues and ask for their support right now and start to tell what I've just told you right now, I probably wouldn't get through 2 of those stories before they would start to get really uncomfortable. Somebody would crack a joke, they'd change the subject, and we would move on. That's the system that we have. It's a complete denial of mistakes. It's a system in which there are 2 kinds of physicians. Those who make mistakes and those who don't. Those who can't handle sleep deprivation and those who can. Those who have lousy outcomes and those who have great outcomes. And it's almost like an immunological reaction, like the antibodies begin to attack that person. And we have this idea that if we drive the people who make mistakes out of medicine, what will we be left with but a safe system? Mistakes are inevitable. So if you take the system as I was taught and weed out all the error-prone health professionals, well, there won't be anybody left. And you know that business about people not wanting to talk about their worst cases? On my show on White Coat Black Art, I made it a habit of saying, here's my worst mistake, I would say to everybody from paramedics to the chief of cardiac surgery. Here's my worst mistake, blah, 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 blah. What about yours? And I would point the microphone towards them. And their pupils would dilate and they would recoil. Then they would look down and swallow hard and start to tell me their stories. They want to tell their stories. They want to share their stories. They want to be able to say, look, don't make the same mistake I did. What they need is an environment to be able to do that. What they need is a redefined medical culture. And it starts with one physician at a time. My name is Brian Goldman. I am a redefined physician. I'm human. I make mistakes. I'm sorry about that. But I strive to learn one thing that I can pass on to other people. I still don't know what you think of me, but I can live with that. And let me close with 3 words of my own. I do remember.